Thank you so much for joining us today at Kaiser University Multidisciplinary Center as we present today's webinar, Literacy, Preparing for Employment Part 2, presented by Dr. Jessica Fuda Daddio.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Okay, thank you, and welcome to part two of preparing for employment. So the first part, I guess I'll remind you a little bit about me, so that way, just in case you didn't see or hear part two or part one. So I am Dr. Fuda Daddio. I am a professor at Kaiser University. Doctoral program in education, as well as the master's program. I'm also an academic advisor. In my spare time, I consult for school districts, especially 7th through 12th grade, special education, specifically in literacy. And so as I've done that, I've learned a ton actually from the teachers in the classrooms and how they're preparing students, for the future, for the world before them outside of school. And so I'm excited to kind of talk a little bit today about preparing for employment from a more communication type way. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide and share with you the description and the objectives for today. So literacy, I'll just read this. Literacy is often thought of as reading and writing, but communication and critical thinking are major aspects of literacy. So last week on Monday, I shared in part one about finding the jobs and reading about them and that type of thing. And in this one, we are going to focus more so on the communication skills and critical thinking that are needed for our students, especially when they go into interviews. So that's going to be a real big focus today, as well as some other little side things that I'd like to share with you too. So the big thing here is preparing them to know, what to do when they're asked questions during the interview. What kind of interview questions could the employer possibly ask? And how should an applicant respond, right? So what would be an appropriate response? And how does a applicant prepare for the job? This second part here of the description is graduating students need to be prepared to enter the workforce. So again, this one's going to be more so in the preparation for the interview, critically thinking, and how do I answer the questions that are being asked to me? Objectives for today, we will explore the definition of literacy. Like I said last time, you're going to see the first few slides in a lot of the presentations that I'm going to be doing, just because it reminds us of what literacy really is. So the more that we see it, the more that we start to really digest what literacy is and take ourselves out of that natural definition of reading and writing and bring us into really the extensiveness of what literacy is for us. So the participants will also learn how to prepare for an interview, and participants will discuss ways to respond to possible employer questions. So what I'm going to do here is take us into literacy first. So again, this is a slide that you'll see in a lot of my presentations, which is literacy is everywhere. And it is how we read, write, listen, communicate, think, and speak. So if we think about this and we're thinking about, okay, we're preparing our students for the job, for the workforce, right? And they need to be able to read and write. They need to be able to know how to listen and what that means and communicate effectively, and or in some way they need to know how to communicate with others, which goes hand in hand with listening. They need to know how to critically think through things. Like things will come up while on the job that they're going to have to know, how do I problem solve this? Right. And so those are things we talked about on Monday as well, but we'll talk probably a little bit more about those today. And communication goes with speaking, obviously, right? So we're communicating and knowing how to interchange or interact with other people. And we're also able to speak in a way that's understandable to others. This is a slide, again, that I do show every single time, which is really important. And this is the network for processing systems for reading. So this is a little bit more specific to reading, but truthfully, it fits any aspect of literacy. And I explain here about how what we're doing in reading and what that really means is to make meaning, right, when we're reading. we think within, beyond, and about a text. We also think within, beyond, and about situations as well. So we can easily take this processing system and put it into really any aspect of our lives when it comes to communicating, writing, reading, listening. This fits actually. And so when we comprehend, which is something we do on a daily basis, is we actually, our brain is going through a bunch of different types of processes in order to help us to understand what's happening, what's going on, and then how do we react to that situation. So this processing system, if you don't already have it in your classrooms, you definitely want to have this somewhere with your lesson plans, because it does help us in every aspect. It goes to depth, thinking within the text, right? So thinking more literally, going beyond the text, where we are thinking a little bit more critically. And the thinking about the text is the most critical way of thinking, where we start to analyze things beyond just what's right in front of us. All of those aspects obviously are important when we're going into to seek for a job or help our students to find a job. On Monday, I keep wanting to say last week, it feels like it was a week ago. On Monday, I shared with you the literacy skills that became evident when we looked at the website to find a job for Abilities Work. And these were some of the main ones that came out. So I have them listed here. All of these things are literacy skills. That's just what they are, right? So critically thinking, speaking, active listening, reading comprehension, problem solving, judgment and decision making, time management, collaboration, social perceptiveness, writing, and active learning. So in most of the jobs that I looked through on the Abilities Work employment site for Florida, really did come down to these pieces. So when you look at this, and they were just listed there, right? So everything that we do in literacy, as we teach that in our classrooms, is the benefit to the student in every aspect of their life, right? So to be literate is to be powerful. And the reason that is because that is how you get a job. That is how you keep a job. That's how you communicate with other people. So again, I want to take you out of that natural habit of us thinking literacy is reading and writing. It's so much bigger than that. And when we start to realize that, then we already know when we're teaching in our classrooms, anything that we're doing with literacy, even just a discussion, a talk with our students, we're teaching them to be able to go out into the real world and have the literacy skills they need. And it's funny because it's that simple. Just by having conversations with them, talking with them, discussing with them, asking them what they think, those are all ways to prepare them for employment. And like I said, it sounds so simple, but it actually is really, really, really important that we continue these conversations, and they naturally happen. So with that, I want to go into this idea of character traits. Now, this seems like such a big jump, but it's really not. When we're thinking about getting interviewed, think about the questions you're asked. I'm going to show you some in just a few minutes, but a lot of times you're asked about, okay, so tell us, 3 adjectives that describe yourself, right? So you're asked this question at a job interview. Well, are your students going to be able to answer that question? Do they understand what that question is even asking? So ways to teach our students how to interview or to be prepared for that interview when it happens, we need to be having these conversations with them so that way they know what's actually being asked. So if I'm being asked, okay, give me 3 character traits about yourself, I better know what character traits are and what that means. So with that being said, ways to do this. So character adjective, this comes right from the EnglishStudyHere.com. But the idea here is that we're able to have students start to characterize themselves. Like what are my traits, right? And what are positive traits versus negative traits? And what does that mean? And so when asked that question, they'll be able to answer it, right? And so then we talk to them about these different words in order to help them to understand. So obviously we don't want to be telling somebody we're cruel or that we're forgetful. Like those are not good words to be using for an interview. But maybe you could use something like hardworking, right? You could be reserved, patient. So any of the words that you choose from here, there's a conversation to be had, right? So if boring, like obviously we don't want to be known as being boring. So this is something that I would have in my classroom. And we would then be able to utilize this to talk a little bit more about the traits that we have, the traits that our friends have. What traits do we like about other people? What don't we like about other people? I mean, that's an honest conversation. And start to pick this apart, because this is going to be a big piece of how do you get the job? What's different about you than somebody else, right? And so using this type of language, these types of adjectives are going to help them at that beginning part of getting the job. The other thing I was thinking about actually today, as I was waiting for the webinar to start, was the other question that I always think is interesting that employers ask is like, what's your greatest strength and what's your greatest weakness? And even that, right? So if I'm a shy person, maybe that's like, my greatest weakness, I think, but it's also your greatest strength. So even having that conversation with students about whatever their, if they were to choose like 3 of these positive traits, and then maybe they have, pick 2 negative traits that you think you might have, and talk to them about the negative traits and how those could actually become a strength for them. And so when they're asked that question, then they can actually revert back to this lesson that you did with them on character traits. So other ways to talk about teaching character traits, which truthfully is what kind of gets the job, is to talk about the traits of others. So one big thing, even as a parent, if, my child comes home and he's upset, maybe I ask him a little bit about what happened, and then we talk about even the traits of that person and what, why that may have happened, and extend upon this idea of how the traits of other people can affect others, right? So as teachers, that conversation can be had as well, the good and the bad of traits of other people. So it's really easy to notice what's in other people as compared to being reflective on yourself. So maybe that conversation needs to be had first before we start to reflect on ourselves and our character traits. Read aloud and discuss. So something that I stress to my high school teachers, and honestly, at first, I think they thought I had 3 heads, but is bring back picture books, children's picture books. I'm not kidding. I think I shared this before, but I'm going to share it again. I was teaching a high school class, and it was a children's lit class. Okay, so it's a given I'm going to bring picture books. But I would read them some of the simplest stories. Let me think of some right now. There's Patricia Polacco. I'm sure you're familiar, maybe not. A little bit higher level, maybe like they would say 4th, 5th grade. Okay. I read to them so many different stories, just really beautiful children's books. And some of them I've read to kindergarten, 1st grade students as well. So here I am reading them to the high school. And it was all about the questions I asked them that made that book even more meaningful and made them think a little bit more critically. And I remember one of the students saying to me, "There's no way, Dr. Fuda Daddio, that you read this in 2nd grade. It is so deep." And it was, I honestly can't remember right now what the story was. Oh, I'm sure I'll think of it. But I mean, like, so the depth of what a read aloud can be, I mean, get over this idea of the pictures. Like, that's like the storyline, right? It's like watching a movie are those pictures. But the words that are put into stories, into picture books specifically, can have such a meaningful conversation and a really in-depth conversation about life, or about problem solving, or character conflict. And when you think about literacy, that idea of character conflict, character traits, asking ourselves serious questions about the problem solving that happened within the story, those things prepare students for employment. It is up to the teacher on how you direct that conversation. So don't write off picture books, bring them back. I remember the first time after elementary school that I had heard a picture book. It didn't happen until college. And it was the most incredible experience to hear a picture book and think so critically about it in college. So what does that mean? It means high school students want to do the same. But unfortunately, we kind of put those picture books as children's books. They're just for kids. They're not. So bring them back, have the conversations, and then direct that conversation into the real life experiences that will happen. And that, my friends, will help them get a job. It really will. So you think outside the box, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It seems simple, but think outside the box. Bring things back in and have the deep conversations. Graphic organizers, and I'll show you some examples of those, but as you have conversations about character traits or character conflict or anything like that, you can obviously use the graphic organizers. I am very careful about using graphic organizers with students for a few reasons. I was a literacy coach and I was coaching a teacher in writing. Okay, so and what that means is that she's teaching her class of 25 students. I'm coming in, observing her, and then talking to her about different strategies to teach writing with whatever genre of writing she was doing. And she kept pulling out these graphic organizers, and I kept going, I don't understand. Why do we have to have a graphic organizer for everything? So I'm that writer that's messy, right? I have a piece of paper, I write on it, and then I put it together. I don't need a graphic organizer to do that. But her way of learning and thinking is through a graphic organizer to truly organize her thoughts. So as we sat there and started to realize this within each other, we realized that we needed to no longer say, okay, you have to complete a graphic organizer, but instead give them the choice, right? So we start to give them choices as to whether or not they want to complete a graphic organizer or do it in a different way. What this does is it helps students to take ownership over their learning. This again prepares them for the workforce. So graphic organizers are a beautiful tool to use with students, but you have to be open to the idea too that they may want to try or do something else. Like for example, maybe they want to draw a picture instead of writing down these things in a graphic organizer. And that's okay. That's part of their character. And then those are the things we look at to help them to decide where they want to go. Like, what do you want to do when you get out of college or out of high school? So what are our goals? Here are some things I'm noticing you're really good at. This is the type of thinker you are. So everything that we do prepares them. The last thing here, and there's plenty more, please know that. But the last thing I just have listed here, just because of time, is social stories. Now, social stories, when you look at them, again, are going to look elementary. Not all of them, but some of them. And I love the books by Julia Cook. So I just have her name here. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with her. But the reason I bring in social stories to prepare students for an interview, all of this seems so strange, right? But really, another question that could be asked in an interview is, how do you handle conflict? Well, we've done a read aloud, right, to teach our students about conflict and how that results even in the workplace. And in social stories, we can also do readings where it helps them to see how somebody got through a conflict, right? And that conversation that occurs. So social stories have a lot of wonderful meaning to them, especially in real life situations. So if I'm faced with something, how do I handle it? And the social stories will help with that conversation, which again, naturally prepares them for the interview. But see, the thing that you have to remember is, so we can teach them all these literacy things, but if they're in a box and they think that this is just what they have to learn because they're in school, that's where we lose them. So something I tell teachers, pre-service teachers to do, and teachers that I'm consulting with, is give them a purpose. Okay. And the purpose shouldn't just be the teacher's going to do this read aloud and I have to complete this assignment because the teacher told me to. No. You need to make your teaching more purposeful. And what that means is when I get up in front of my students, I'm going to tell you, this is the purpose of the lesson today, and this is why it's important to you. So if I'm doing a read aloud, right? So the conversation today during our read aloud is going to be about character traits. This is really important for you to understand so you can figure out your own traits, which then whenever you go out for a job, you'll be able to answer the question when you're asked, what are three character traits about you, or what are 3 traits that you hold? So when you give them that at the very beginning of your teaching, you're now zoning them in so they understand why they're learning something. From that, then you go into the lesson. And then when you conclude your lesson, bring them back to your purpose and let them know that what you're teaching them is going to help them in the real world. So those conversations are important. It focuses them in and it keeps them wanting to hear what you have to say because it's beyond school. So interview skills, and this I took from the Bruce Woodcock. So you can see there in the middle one where it says interview skills, exactly where this came from, University of Kent Careers. So I kind of liked this because I thought that this graphic organizer or little image actually kind of does let us know what we need to make sure our students are capable of. And we naturally teach it. Now it's just helping them to take what we're learning in school and understand the connection to the real world. So in this case, preparation, I'm looking at the top left-hand corner here. So carefully research the job. Now, when I was looking, and I'll go back to that Abilities Work website for you in just a second, but that website does tell you everything they pretty much need to know about where they're looking to get a job. So it does tell you about the job, the employer. And that's really nice. So they can read on that. They need to be prepared, know where they're trying to get a job, know what they're all about. And then even talking to them about how to dress, like what should they wear, depending on what type of job they're trying to go out for, would help them to know what they should be wearing, right? So the idea here is that you show an interest. You care enough to brush your hair that day. You care enough to wear clean jeans if it's a certain type of interview. But either way, that dressing is even part of a conversation that needs to be had. What is body language? Again, do your students know? Like, have you talked to them about what body language is? What does it? Well, now we wear masks, right? So hopefully someday that won't be the case. But to be able to smile and make eye contact, which that one I'd be careful with. Eye contact is an interesting thing. As we know, in some cultures, it's completely unacceptable. So the eye contact thing, I'm always really careful with that one, but I do understand why they say it, especially whenever you're going to an interview. Like, you want to seem assertive, right? Shaking hands may become a fist pump now, given our COVID times. But either way, your body language and how you sit there, and if you're nodding your head while the interviewer is talking, just those really simple types of things, that's a lesson. You could have a whole lesson on body language. And even think about charades. Again, I don't know if you played charades, I'm sure you have, but that right there is a way to talk about body language. So somebody's mad, what do they look like? What if somebody's really tired, what's happening in their body, right? That's all body language. And they start to read that, then teach them what it looks like to look assertive. And those are the things they can take with them into an interview. Competency questions, right? Describe a situation where you worked in a team. So these students are coming out of high school, all right? So maybe they've had some team activities they've done, but maybe you've offered them some different ways that they can work collaboratively together. And what did that look like? What was that project that you had them do? And is that something that they could share at an interview? So when you're planning your group projects that you're doing, maybe think about that. Think about collaboration. Think about what this would mean when they go out to the to the workforce. And isn't it an example that they could use there? And then talk to your students about that. Give an example of your leadership skills. This one, again, if they were, part of a team, a sports team, if they were part of anything like that, obviously there's some leadership skills there. If they were not part of that, that does not mean they're not leaders. It certainly means that they have leadership skills in different places. And so to have the conversation of here's where you really show some leadership skills is pretty important, right? So get to know your students. Obviously, you know that. And then talk to them about their leadership skills. What does that mean? What does it look like? What do they seem to possess? Questions about your CV or application form. Okay, so when they apply for these positions, there's certain things they're going to put on their applications that they need to make sure that they're aware that they put there. And when I say that, I laugh because I remember interviewing at a college for a tenured track position. And I was asked things from my Vita, which I hadn't looked at for a while. And a big one was about my dissertation. Like, okay, so tell me how many people were in your study? What was your study really about? And it was like years after I had defended my dissertation, to which I repressed after. So I remember sitting there like, I don't remember, I mean, I really didn't remember. This is to say the interview did not go well. So they want to make sure to brush up on the things that they, put in their applications. A lot of times out of high school, many times the applications are pretty simple, but at the same time, they need to know what they wrote there, right? So if it's brought to their attention, then they can talk about it. So I learned that firsthand. Hypothetical questions, these are important too. So when we're talking social stories, even we can talk about, how they would deal with an irate customer. So let's say they're getting a job in service and they're, at a restaurant or something, and a customer is very irritated, very angry. How do you handle that? One big thing I'll tell you is that there is a way to handle people that are angry by allowing them just to talk. And they need to have that conversation, that type of training in high school too, to know like, okay, if somebody's upset, somebody's starting to get irate, how do we handle this? That goes back to your body language too. So those conversations and what that looks like, and another lesson we have right here, which is how do you handle something when a stressful situation starts to get intensified? And the big thing is don't fuel it. Do not fuel it. Do not try to make it better. Do not try to question the person that's upset, and see if you can't get them to settle down on their own, because they're not going to get that reaction from you. Teachers, this is again a really good lesson even for you. So as we, if you work in emotional support, if you work in life skills, wherever your position might be in the high school or middle school, it's a great lesson for us as well to think about not allowing a situation to hype us up, to stay calm. And that's really difficult to do. There is an outstanding speaker. I think his name's, I want to say it's, I present again on Monday. So if I can't think of his name right now, I'll make sure to share it with you on Monday. But I think it's Brian, I want to say Mendelson. I think somebody's probably out there going, oh, it's this. But anyway, he has a bunch of different videos you can watch about not always having to have the last word. So as teachers, this is a great lesson, and then a great lesson to share with your students. So that way they can answer the question of how they would react in a situation that was high stress. So your unique selling points, these are the skills and attributes that you have that stand out against others. So that's why I brought up this idea of the character traits. As we had the discussion of character traits with our students, we prepare them with that idea. Those traits are what's going to set them apart from somebody else. And to be able to discuss those traits in a way that helps to sell them. I mean, I hate to say that word, sell them, but that's really what you're doing when you're doing your interview. Is you're trying to sell yourself. You're trying to put your best foot forward and share with that interviewer what you have to offer and what you can bring to their company or to their institution. The last thing with interviewing is to make sure that your students are prepared to ask questions. I think this is something I was always told throughout all of my schooling was just be sure when you go to your interview, have a question, like have something to ask them. And it was always funny because I never really did have a question at the end of my interviews. Let's just say I wasn't the best interviewee. I got better with time, but just make sure they have a question. Like, when does the job start? Hopefully you'll find that out through the interview, but have some backup questions as well that they can ask at the interview. All right, so let me take you now into this website. This is the 40 interview questions for students with examples. And what I've done again with this presentation is instead of just putting it right here in this one PowerPoint, I think it's important for us to get into these websites and look at them. So let me go ahead and take you there. Just give me 1 second as my mouse, I'm having some technology things happening today. So, all right, let's see, share. There we go. 40 interview questions. Don't need that. Beautiful. All right, so when we look at this, 40 interview questions for students with examples. This is from April 5th, 2021. And this is from Indeed editorial team. So I just want to take us down. We probably won't sit in this very long, but I just want you to be aware of the availability. This is, again, brand new too from 2021. So in job interviews, you will likely be asked several general questions, right? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Remember these questions when you were interviewed. These are never the fun ones. So make sure they're prepared to talk about themselves. How did they learn about the company? Maybe they could share that they learned it from this website, Abilities Work, which a reminder on this website is this is Florida employers looking to hire qualified job seekers with disabilities. Okay. And this is an excellent site for students to talk about whenever it's like, well, how did you hear about us? Well, I was on the Florida Abilities Work site, and they can talk about what they learned through that website. So make sure they are aware and have bookmarked this page. Okay, what are your strengths? Look at this. We just talked about these, even through character traits, right? So what are your strengths? What you consider your weaknesses? Remember to tell students that they need to be, whatever their weaknesses should be their greatest strength at the same time. What does that look like? Why do you want to work here? So something I was looking at today on the Abilities Work website was we have a lot of children and students that love animals, which I love. I'm a huge animal lover. And there are different jobs and Abilities Work with animals, like the Humane Society, where they're paying $10 a day or $10 an hour. So like there are jobs like that as well that they could even get involved with that as a volunteer, and then actually get into the job itself. But when we talk about like, why do you want to work here? I was just thinking with animals and things like, what is your love and passion for animals? Why? What do you want to do with that? Where do you want to go? So just a great conversation again to have with our students, getting them so involved and ready for the future. Take them out of novels. That's the other thing I'm going to tell you. Bring them into real world literacy, real world literacy. And I want you to think about yourself and this idea of, and it's funny, it sounds like I'm going to the side, but I'm not. How often do you read a novel? Now, some people are getting back into this idea of reading, when COVID happened and everything, but I'm not telling you not to. If you're an avid reader, oh, bless you. But not everybody is. And so we want to take them out of this idea of novel reading into real life literacy. What does that look like? What I'm sharing with you today, what I shared with you on Monday, and what I will continue to share with you throughout the rest of the webinars I have with you, it's all about real world literacy and how to prepare for what's to come. Okay. So why do you want to work here? Your ideal, so we'll get back into this. Your ideal work environment. How would others describe you? Well, guess what? If you did that character trait activity in your classroom that we talked about earlier, they're easily going to be able to answer that question. How would peers describe you? Well, when I was in so-and-so's class, this is how my peers described me. This is why they said that. The question that I still think is just so goofy is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I mean, really? So they'll be asked that because it's just a question, but maybe you can give them a kind of quick response for that one. And then, do you have any questions? Always ends with that. So these ones are about experience and background. And I don't need to go through each of these, but this kind of helps them to, when you're thinking of your teaching lessons, maybe your purpose, maybe you do look at these questions and think, okay, well, how can I teach my students to be able to answer this? And so notice this one. Do you have any plans to continue your education? Well, do they? They need to know, do they plan to go to college, or right now are they deciding that this is the right place for them? In-depth questions. Whew. So as we get into these in-depth questions, right, we need to start to get that critical thinking. I want you to think of that circle of comprehension I shared with you earlier, those processes. And do you notice how this is set up with the questions, right? Where it's really literal. So think about within the text, literal. And then we go into beyond the text, which is more in depth. And then about. So that little processy circle I gave you follows an interview as well. So here, how do you handle working under pressure? Okay, so now they've had, remember, you can teach a social story about working under pressure. What does that look like? How do you handle it? have the conversation. When they go in for their interview, they're able to answer the question. Are you willing to work on the weekends? Do you have any leadership experience? So maybe they were the leader in one of your big group projects, maybe. So they can bring that to the table as well. But they need you to share with them that what they're doing in school, again, and I'm going to reinforce this, is that what they're doing with you is exactly what they need to talk about when they go into their interviews. So don't just do group work to do it. Do group work and make it meaningful for real world. Show them the connection. Share with them that connection so they can use those examples. Because many times students don't think to do that. School's separate from real world. That needs to change. What kinds of people do you work best with? That again is going to go along with that character trait lesson that you would do with your students, or read alouds that you do with your students, where who can I work with and who can't I, and why, right? For this one, the who do you work best with, the conversation of who you don't work best with probably shouldn't come up, but you would definitely sell this idea of who you work best with and why you do. All right, and then here are the sample answers. So even if you looked at this at your own leisure and looked at what the answers were, so example, I think it would be really helpful as you plan your lessons to help your students from transitioning from school to career. The next one I'm going to share with you is top job interview tips for college students. This comes from the Balanced Careers website. This is from 2020 by Allison Doyle. And again, I'm not going to go too in depth with this article either. I think it's important that you go ahead and jump into this website to help with your lesson planning. But here's 15 job interview tips for college students. They still work for high school. Prepare a list of your top qualities. Skills, areas of knowledge, experience. So these things here, prepare your top qualities, still goes off of character traits. It also, in this case, is going off of your skills, like what you're capable of doing. How do you work with other people? Going off social stories that you might teach your students. Their experience. So again, the Humane Society, the reason I mentioned they could volunteer right now if they really love to work with animals and that's what they want to do. Volunteer now, bring that experience to the table whenever you interview for a job, for the actual paying job. Describe why you find the job appealing. We kind of talked about that. Like, why would this be a job that I want to do? And it has to be beyond I love animals, but it should be something that's a little bit, or maybe they want to get into service and get into hospitality. Why would you get into hospitality? You know, maybe their mom does something with that and that's something that they want to take on. And help people to feel comfortable, whatever. Practice your interview answers. So a really good idea is to have students record themselves answering interview questions and then listen to their answers. And I think that's a really great way for them to reflect on whether or not what their answer was actually answered the question being asked. So you could do that in school. You could do that in small groups for sure and have them talk about it. Scheduling your interview carefully, have their contact information handy, dress appropriately. So you don't want to roll out of bed from class in your pajamas. Bring a copy of your resume and cover letter. Now, in this case, it would really depend on what type of job they're going in for as to whether or not they need a resume and cover letter. Now, if they do lesson, it's a lesson. You need to teach them how to write a resume, what that looks like, and then what a cover letter is. Right? So that needs to be a lesson in class and that they can complete. A big one, especially for our children today, is to make sure your phone is on silent. The last thing you want, and it happens, right? It will even happen to the interviewer sometimes where the phone will ring because you forget to put it on silent. So a really good lesson, as simple as it seems, make sure the phone is on silent or don't bring it into the interview at all. Make sure you don't have headphones around. Don't drink bring food or drinks. This seems so simple, but these are tips. Don't bring your friends. Be polite, professional, attentive. Know your availability. That's a big one too. So as high school students, depending on if they're, with parents or not, with their parents or not, is to have that conversation before they go into their interview. is okay, what is my availability? Like they need to have that conversation so that way they're prepared to answer that question when they go in for the interview. Be upfront about when you can work, and then make sure that they know to send a thank you letter when it's over. So as simple as that seems, it's still a conversation that needs to be had. All right, so the next one, and we'll be wrapping actually up here very shortly, is this one. So how to teach interviews. I love this applied educational systems. Has unfortunately there's a payment for this website. I didn't pay for it, so you can still read the articles, but in the curriculum areas that they touch on. But I just really I feel like I find a lot of different things in here. Plus there's a blog, which is kind of nice. But this is from 2018. And this is helping high school teachers, what can you do to get students ready for a job? Good interview skills are obviously important for every high school student to learn, as we've already kind of talked about. So I'm not going to get into all of that again, but introduce interview skills to your class. So Monday, we talked about this idea of hard skills, which can be taught, versus soft skills, which can't really be taught, but it could be discussed. And the reason it can be discussed is because students then can become more aware of what it's meant by a soft skill. And this is that idea of being able to have a conversation, of being personable, of being able to answer questions, like this idea of just the soft skill. So having that conversation of what that means and what that looks like is important for any child or student to learn. So you want to teach this to them. So the other thing is when number 2, talk about why good interview skills matter. Well, that's the purpose. So when you're teaching a lesson to your students, when I said earlier, have a purpose for why you're teaching it, tell the students what the purpose is, and then tell them why. Why are they learning this? And so that number 2 here is the rationale. So if I'm teaching, okay, today we're going to learn about how to do an interview. This is important for you to understand because all of you will be out there in the real world interviewing to find your jobs. So you need to tell them why it's important to understand good interview skills. You can always see there's hyperlinks here to help you as well to find different types of lessons and activities that you can do. Explain to them what good interview skills look like. So what you're seeing here is everything that I'm sharing with you is interconnecting or overlapping. And what that tells you is the information I'm sharing with you is pretty valid and reliable in the sense that here, what does it look like? Well, here's the basics. Let's look down here. Body language. So that game of charades that we think is a goofy game actually might be the best game you can play with them because body language does mean a lot in an interview. Communication skills. Professional attire. So what do you wear? What do you bring to your interview? Not snacks. We know that, and no water. Well, you could probably bring water, but I probably wouldn't pull it out in the middle of the interview. And the questions they're going to ask the interviewer also would be important for them to be prepared with. And they can have that. The other thing I've noticed with students that go to interview, some of them are a little, they think better when their hand is moving. And what I mean by that, it's okay to bring a tablet and a pen with you to an interview. It's okay to take notes as the interviewer is asking you questions. Like, let them know that. Like, give them that security to know if that's the way they think, it's perfectly fine. And then this just gives you ideas of things you can do to prepare them for what a good interview looks like. So you can see the lecture and brainstorming. And the last thing they say is to end with a big group project, which is really a nice idea. So if you're teaching the class as a whole, what it looks like to have good interview skills, okay? And then you break them into small groups so they can start to practice what this looks like and even videotape a scenario of them doing an interview with each other. You could totally do that. It would be really interesting. And then they could give the what to do and what not to do. And then you can watch it as a class and discuss it together. And trust me, good laughs will come from this. The students will be involved and you're not wasting time because you're definitely preparing them for career. And that's what this is all about, right? Is career and college readiness anymore. So you will be doing everything you need literacy wise. You'll be hitting the standards you need to just by doing an activity like this, and it will be meaningful. So there's that. Okay, the other thing, let me see. Oh, I wanted to show you the graphic organizer possibilities for traits. So as you can see here, there's a billion of them. You can choose any of these to talk about traits, but this is what can become overwhelming to students. So you don't want to always make them fill out a graphic organizer about character traits. They can do something very simplistic, or you can have several of these as choices for them as you go through different activities and lessons on traits. So the bottom line is that you really do start to see that what you've been teaching in school and what you continue to teach in school, all of that is so important and impactful for their futures. But it's our job as teachers to be able to tell the students what you're learning here, you can use in your interview. What you're doing right now is a leadership skill. Make sure you think about that, because whenever you go in for your first job interview, they're going to ask you about your leadership skills. Being able to collaborate, tell them we're doing this small group activity because it's showing that you can collaborate with others, work with others, a good skill when you go out for your interviews. So start to make those connections for them so they know what you're teaching them actually matters outside of school. Let me go back to our PowerPoint, make sure I've covered everything. Okay, so we got through this website. So again, all of the websites I take you to are always in the PowerPoint. And I did show you all of those. And actually, that's going to wrap us up. So comments and questions.